Today, let's talk about a dark chapter in Japan's history, the story of Aum Shinrikyo, a doomsday cult that began as a spiritual movement before descending into terror. Led by the enigmatic Shoko Asahara, this group shocked the world in 1995 with a deadly sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway. But how did a self-proclaimed enlightened guru amass such a following? And what drove his disciples to commit unthinkable violence? This is the chilling tale of faith, manipulation, and destruction. Now let's go back to Kumamoto, Japan, in 1955. The man who would bring terror to Tokyo was born as Chizuo Matsumoto in 1955, in a small town in the Kumamoto prefecture of Japan. Partially blind from birth and raised in poverty, he was sent to a school for the visually impaired, where students often faced a rigid and isolated life. Even in childhood, he stood apart, not just for his ambition, but for the way he manipulated others. He was not the quiet outsider. He was the one who controlled the quiet ones. In his early adult years, he drifted between professions: acupuncturist, herbalist, salesman. He studied Chinese medicine and dabbled in spiritual practices that were gathering momentum in Japan's New Age movement. But ambition ran deeper than healing. In the 1980s, he took the name Shoko Asahara and began teaching yoga and meditation. What began as a modest spiritual group evolved quickly into something far more elaborate. He claimed visions, then revelations, then divine status. Aum Shinrikyo, Supreme Truth, was born from that transformation. Drawing on a volatile mix of Buddhism, Hinduism, and distorted Christian eschatology, Asahara positioned himself not merely as a teacher, but as a living Buddha. His sermons spoke of karma, liberation, and spiritual purity. But woven between the mantras was a darker thread, that the world was corrupt, the apocalypse was near, and only those who followed him could be saved. He told his followers that only through pain could enlightenment be achieved, and they believed him. What made Aum different was not just its teachings, but who it attracted. Asahara did not build his following from society's fringes. He pulled in the elite: doctors, engineers, physicists, young, educated men and women from Japan's top universities found something in his doctrine that spoke to their disillusionment: the promise of purpose, the clarity of good and evil, a place where they could be both intellectually challenged and spiritually redeemed. In a Japan grappling with economic uncertainty and spiritual voids, Aum offered an identity stronger than the state. As the 1980s gave way to the 90s, Aum Shinrikyo grew, not as a fringe cult, but as a legal religious organization with offices, laboratories, even political ambitions. Asahara claimed to be able to levitate, to see into the future, to cleanse the sins of others through suffering. And while outsiders saw eccentricity, his followers saw divinity. In their eyes, he was not a man, but a savior preparing them for the end of the world. By the early 1990s, Aum Shinrikyo was no longer just a spiritual curiosity. It was an empire hidden in plain sight. The group's headquarters, nestled in a secluded compound at the base of Mount Fuji, operated like a self-contained state. Followers lived communally, gave up their possessions, and submitted every detail of their lives to the will of the cult. Inside, spiritual practice blurred with control. Devotion meant discipline. Enlightenment required obedience. At its peak, Aum had an estimated 10,000 members in Japan and thousands more abroad. It opened offices in Moscow and set up recruitment cells in major Japanese cities. Members wore flowing white robes and shaved their heads in tribute to their master. Children were born into the group and raised under its doctrines. Members were told to abandon their families. Contact with the outside world was severed. The cult had become their new reality. Asahara's prophecies grew darker. He spoke of a coming nuclear war, orchestrated by the United States, that would annihilate Japan. Aum, he said, would be the ark that saved the righteous. His predictions were elaborate, delivered with the conviction of someone who believed, or desperately needed others to believe. He claimed to possess supernatural powers: telepathy, mind reading, astral projection. On television, he appeared eccentric but harmless. Inside the compound, he was absolute. Behind the spiritual front, the group began preparing for something else entirely. Aum poured money into science and technology. Recruited scientists built laboratories capable of producing nerve agents, bacteria, and chemical weapons. The group amassed stockpiles of sarin gas, VX, anthrax cultures, even developed prototypes for automatic weapons and drones. This was not devotion, it was militarization. They were preparing not just for survival, but for war. Dissent within the group was crushed. Members who doubted or attempted escape were subjected to brutal punishment. Some were tortured, others simply disappeared. Surveillance was constant. Punishments were framed as a means to cleanse karma. The threat of eternal damnation loomed over every act of disobedience. For Asahara, loyalty was currency, and fear was his most faithful tool. The outside world saw flickers of unease. Journalists who questioned Aum's activities were sued, stalked, or threatened. Former members spoke of abuse, of brainwashing, of hidden weapons and secret rituals. But law enforcement hesitated. In Japan, religious freedom was sacred. The state had little precedent for confronting a legally recognized religion, especially one so well-funded, so well-defended, and so deeply convinced of its divine mission. Asahara began positioning himself not just as a prophet, but as the political savior of Japan. In 1990, Aum ran candidates in national elections. All of them lost. Publicly, it was a failed stunt. Privately, it marked a turning point. Humiliated, enraged, and increasingly paranoid, Asahara turned fully inward. If he could not save Japan through politics, he would do it through destruction. The failures of politics hardened Asahara's belief that the world was beyond saving. His sermons shifted from spiritual transformation to survival through destruction. The coming apocalypse, once a divine inevitability, became something Aum would help usher in. If the world was corrupt, then cleansing it became their sacred duty. By 1993, the transformation from cult to covert weapons operation was complete. In the remote compounds at the foot of Mount Fuji and in hidden labs scattered across Japan, followers worked around the clock to develop tools of mass death. The group's scientific core, composed of former university researchers and chemical engineers, synthesized sarin gas, a deadly nerve agent that attacks the nervous system within seconds. They also experimented with VX gas, anthrax, and botulinum toxin. The doctrine no longer spoke only of spiritual purity. It now praised violence as holy intervention. Practice attacks began in secret. In June 1994, in the city of Matsumoto, Aum members released sarin gas from a converted refrigeration truck outside a residential building. The gas drifted into nearby homes. 7 people died, hundreds were injured, but local authorities misattributed the cause to a pesticide leak. Aum went unpunished. Encouraged by the success and the lack of consequences, Asahara grew bolder. Inside the compound, torture continued under the guise of purification. Defectors were electrocuted, drowned, and suffocated with lethal injections. Some were incinerated, their remains dumped in rivers or buried in remote forest land. A culture of terror thrived beneath the surface. Asahara's top lieutenants operated like a military council, each carrying out orders with robotic precision, each convinced that the end justified any means. Surveillance of enemies intensified. Journalists, lawyers, and former followers were tracked, intimidated, and in some cases, assassinated. One prominent critic, an anti-cult lawyer named Tsutsumi Sakamoto, was murdered along with his wife and infant son in 1989, years before the subway attack. Their bodies were hidden, their case left unsolved for nearly a decade. It was a message: leave Aum alone or vanish. Despite mounting suspicions, Japanese law enforcement remained paralyzed. The group's legal religious status, combined with its resources and internal discipline, created an impenetrable wall. Even when neighbors reported strange odors and sightings near the compound, even as international observers warned of cult extremism, police hesitated. To act too soon might spark public outrage. To act too late would prove fatal. Asahara believed himself to be the Japanese incarnation of Christ, Shiva, and the Buddha combined. In his visions, he saw a purged world, reborn through flame and gas. He would not wait for the end. He would bring it. And so the plan began to strike Tokyo's subway system. 5 trains, 5 operatives, 1 coordinated morning, using sarin gas as the catalyst for Armageddon. It was a Monday morning, March 20th, 1995. Tokyo's subway system was moving millions of commuters through the heart of the city as it did every weekday. Effortless, precise, unthinking in its rhythm. No one noticed the 5 men boarding 5 different trains, each carrying identical packages. Plastic bags of liquid sarin wrapped in newspaper, each sealed inside a double-layered container. Each man carried a sharpened umbrella. The orders were simple. At coordinated times, they would drop the bags onto the floor, puncture them with the umbrella tips, and step off the train. The gas would begin to vaporize instantly. Colorless, invisible, lethal. At 7:46 a.m., the first attack began. A train on the Chiyoda line departed with a silent payload. Moments later, passengers began to collapse. Some convulsed, others foamed at the mouth. Many gasped for air, their lungs locked by a toxin they couldn't see. Panic rippled through the car, then the platform, then the entire station. Within minutes, other lines, the Marunouchi, Hibiya, and Kasumigaseki, fell into chaos. The scale of the attack became clear in flashes. Emergency calls surged. Ambulances were dispatched to different parts of the city, each believing they were responding to isolated incidents. Victims staggered into the street, blinded, choking, collapsing. Hospital staff had no idea what they were dealing with. Some first responders were poisoned as they tried to help. No one knew that a chemical war had just been waged in the heart of Tokyo. Sarin gas, absorbed through the eyes, skin, or lungs, attacks the nervous system by paralyzing the muscles that control breathing. Just 1 drop can be fatal. Aum had released enough to kill thousands. But through poor dispersion and ventilation in the tunnels, most survived. Still, the toll was devastating. 13 dead, over 1,000 injured, and more than 5,000 affected in some way. For days, Tokyo remained in a fog of confusion and fear. The attack shattered Japan's illusion of safety. A society known for its order and restraint had been blindsided by a homegrown force of chaos. Citizens wore masks, avoided the subway, and feared the invisible. The government was slow to respond. The public demanded answers. Who could have done this? And why? Then the name surfaced. Aum Shinrikyo. As the story broke, it unraveled in waves. Former members came forward. Whistleblowers detailed the inner workings of the cult. Secret labs were discovered. Sarin production sites were exposed. The group's involvement was no longer rumor. It was fact. The scale of what they had built stunned even seasoned investigators. Within days, authorities launched coordinated raids across Aum properties. They found gas masks, weapons manuals, stockpiles of chemicals, and a complex web of surveillance records, coded messages, and training videos. The utopia Aum promised had never existed. It had been a war machine disguised as a temple. But the man behind it all was nowhere to be found. Shoko Asahara had vanished. The country was in shock, and the manhunt began immediately. Helicopters circled above Aum compounds. Tactical police units swept through fortified buildings and underground chambers. Masked operatives broke open sealed rooms and locked vaults. Day after day, the news aired surreal images. Rows of white-robed disciples in handcuffs, silent laboratories full of gas canisters, and grotesque torture devices hidden behind meditation halls. But still, no sign of Shoko Asahara. It took 2 months. On May 16, 1995, authorities found him hiding in a secret chamber beneath Aum's Tokyo headquarters. He was unshaven, cloaked in white, and silent. When pulled from the shadows, he did not resist. He did not speak. The prophet who once commanded thousands now sat in stunned silence as the full weight of the state bore down on him. Over the following weeks, more arrests followed. Aum's leadership, once fanatically loyal, began to fracture. Some denied involvement. Others, when faced with overwhelming evidence, confessed in chilling detail. They described how sarin was made, how the attacks were rehearsed, how Asahara issued orders with cold finality. To many of them, Murder had not been a crime. It had been an act of spiritual warfare. The trial became one of the longest and most closely watched in Japanese history. Asahara was charged with masterminding the Tokyo subway attack, the Matsumoto sarin incident, the Sakamoto family murders, and a string of other violent crimes. The courtroom became a stage for horror. Survivors recounted seizures, blindness, and trauma. Families of the dead stared across the room at the man they held responsible. Through it all, Asahara mumbled incoherently or refused to speak altogether. In 2004, he was sentenced to death. 13 other senior members received the same fate. The executions would not be carried out until years later, but for many, the verdict brought a measure of closure. Justice, though slow, had finally caught up to the prophet of death. And yet Aum did not fully die. The group rebranded itself as ALF and later split into factions. Though the core leadership was gone, remnants remained. Some members distanced themselves from violence, claiming Asahara had lost his way. Others still revered him as a misunderstood visionary. In Japan, the legacy of Aum became a scar, a reminder that terror can rise not from foreign enemies, but from within. Public trust was fractured. The government faced harsh criticism for missing the warning signs. Police and intelligence agencies overhauled how they monitored religious organizations. Laws were rewritten. The phrase religious cult was no longer dismissed with polite disbelief. The fall of Aum Shinrikyo was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of Japan's reckoning with its vulnerability to extremism, to blind obedience, and to the seductive promise of meaning at any cost. If you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying the story. If you're interested in more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a great story. As a new channel, Wet Gloves values your feedback more than anything. Let us know in the comments what you enjoyed about this video and how we can make our content even better. Your support through subscriptions and notifications means everything to us. It's what allows us to keep bringing you these compelling stories every Tuesday. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you never miss an update. This is Liam, and I'll see you next time.